Hi there, Sugar Snaps. Today I want to share how to spin wool on a spinning wheel. I have here a Ashford Kiwi. This is a double treadle wheel, and my Ashford Traveler, which is a single treadle wheel. This is a Saxony style wheel. This is a castle style wheel. You can see the wheel is on one leg and the treadles are in the base. This one has 3 legs. Leg here, one in the back and one on the side. So that is the Saxony silhouette. This is the castle silhouette. I suggest spinners who are first starting out should start with wool, because wool is a fiber that tends to have a longer hair length. So the fiber length tends to be a little bit longer than, say, cotton, which is a short fiber length. And it's very available in spinning communities, so you can find it at spinning stores or online. It also comes in a lot of different colors, which is fun. You can find lots of dyed fiber, so you can use colors or multi-dyed fiber. So it's a fun one to start out with. I have some pretty basics here. This is a Jacob fiber. This is a natural brown and gray heather. And then a Corriedale fiber. This is just the natural cream. A roving is a batch of fiber that has been processed, so it comes out in a long strand of fibers where the hairs are parallel to each other. A sliver is like a roving. It's a little bit smaller. The hairs aren't quite as organized, but it's also a long strand of fiber. There's also a bat, which comes off a drum card, and that is typically a rectangular piece of fiber that the fibers have been mostly carded in one direction, but it comes out in more of a sheet, and you can pull off hanks of fiber from the bat. There are thousands of sheep breeds that produce spinning fiber. I have a resource in the description below to a great book about many of the different types of sheep and their fiber qualities. I love that book, so I would check it out if I were you. And one of them that they go over is the Jacob fiber, which is this guy here. So a Jacob fiber is a bit of a coarse fiber. It is from a sheep that has a guard hair as well as an undercoating. This has been processed, so I just have the undercoating and the guard hairs have been pulled off. So some sheep have the woolly part, which is the base coat with little guard hairs poking up over top, and those guard the fibers underneath. And when processing fibers, sometimes the guard hairs will be pulled off and then that under portion processed to create roving or spinning fiber. And that's what this is here. There's also merino fiber, which is this guy here. This is a merino, which is a very fine, very soft fiber. This is great for garments because it typically doesn't itch against your skin, whereas a Jacob fiber is a lot coarser, so it's better for rug use or tapestries or something that's an outer garment that won't be right against your skin. When you're starting out, choose a fiber based on the project that you want to test, or if you're like me and you just like to spin fiber for the fun of it, just start with whatever and it'll end up in your yarn stash anyways. I do suggest starting with a merino if you're going to be using it for knitting yarn for a garment, though this is not necessarily the best wool to begin with because it's finer and it's a little more slick, so it's a little bit tougher to spin on. I began on a coarser fiber like this Jacob, and it made it a lot easier to spin because the coarseness means that the fibers were a little bit longer and it was easier to handle them because they stick together a little bit more. They're more crimpy, and so they tangle up more, and so it was easier to get them onto the wheel and spun into a yarn without them sliding out of my fingers as I was working. I have a beginner spinning video up here. Check that out before getting started with this video because it goes over all of the basic steps, breaking down each step of the process to get you started spinning on your wheel without a bunch of stress learning all the steps at once. I break down each thing into an individual portion and then put the pieces together so that it makes it a lot more achievable. When you're ready to start spinning, you're going to need to set up your wheel. I have a bobbin on my wheel that has yarn spun onto it already. I'm going to pretend this is a leader yarn and guide it through my hooks. A leader yarn being the piece of string you put on your bobbin to spin onto. And I'm going to put it through the orifice hook here, pull it through with my little orifice hook, put it through this hole, pull it through so I can begin spinning. Now, every spinning wheel is a little bit different. My flyer has little guides, these loop guides, so that it pulls and draws the spun single onto my bobbin nice and evenly. You can see on this Traveler, instead of the loop, I have hooks. So these hooks, I can adjust where the fiber is on these hooks, and that will change where the fiber ends up on the bobbin. So moving it one hook down means that I'll end up with fiber winding onto the bobbin right here. To start out spinning, pull off a bit of the roving that you're working with. And you can either start with the whole bundle or break it in half or into thirds and start with smaller pieces at a time. And then start treadling your wheel in the direction that you're going to be spinning. For singles, I suggest going in a clockwise direction, single being one strand of fiber turned into yarn, so this being a single. And then when you go to ply, you'll twist them in the opposite direction, twist two strands in the opposite direction. So again, what I'm doing here is pulling with one hand. And this is another way to spin. With the coarser fiber, it's easier to spin this way than it is with finer yarns. And what I'm doing here is I'm pulling and guiding the twist into the fiber with one hand while just holding the fiber with my other hand. This is easier to do with coarse fibers because the coarse fibers grab onto each other and so they pull out together more easily. I don't need to choke up like this in order to make sure the twist doesn't enter into it. I can guide it with my right hand. And so on this wheel, a double treadle, you treadle with both feet. You're moving at an even pace, pedaling back and forth. And if you want to be precise about the amount of twist that enters your fiber, you can start to gauge one pull per count how many treadles you do. So pull, count 3, pull, count 3, pull, count 3, that kind of thing. And that will make sure that the same amount of twist enters your full length of the yarn. So now for a single treadle spinning wheel, you're going to be treadling with 1 foot, or I've had suggestions for treadling with 2 feet so that your hips end up being straight forward and angled in the same direction. It's less hard on your body that way. So you'll be pulling the fiber, spinning the wheel, and allowing the spun yarn to wind onto your bobbin. And you can see where my hook is at. That is where the fiber is beginning to be spun onto the bobbin. So I'm using both hands to guide my fiber onto the bobbin and allow the twist to enter the fiber. I'm using my right hand to grip the fiber and pull, while I use my left hand to make sure the twist doesn't end up in my bundle of fiber. So I'm pulling with my right hand, releasing, holding with my left hand, releasing, and pulling with my right hand. And so it's a transition between your 2 fingers or 2 hands so that you can keep the twist out of this section, allow the twist to enter this section. As you fill your bobbin, you'll adjust the hooks to move up the length of the bobbin. When you're ready to take a break, you can take your strand of yarn and wrap it around a loop. Here I have my mother of all adjustment knob that I can wrap it around. On my Kiwi wheel, if I want to break, I can wrap it around the Scotch tension knob here and let that sit and move away from my wheel. If you are new to your wheel and you need to figure out the tension, there are 2 locations that you're going to want to be aware of. The first one is your drive band, making sure your drive band doesn't slide on your wheel. If it's too loose, you'll be able to push it around and it'll just slide over the grooves. If it's tight like this, you'll pull it and the wheel will rotate with it. So my drive band has a nice tension on it. Second, you're going to want to check your other form of tension. Now I'm going to talk about Scotch tension because that's what's on my wheel. There's also other kinds of tensions. For a Scotch tension, I have my Scotch tension knob here leading through up and over the bobbin, and it's hooked here on the side. Now if I want to tighten it, I turn the knob, pull tension on this string, and it pulls on the bobbin, so it holds the bobbin more tightly. What that means is that the yarn is going to get pulled onto the bobbin more quickly. So as I'm spinning here, it's going to pull with more tension on the fiber and draw it in more quickly. If I loosen the tension, then you end up with too much twist, and you end up like this, where the yarn wants to start to ply on itself already, the tension isn't balanced and the twist isn't balanced, and you end up with a yo-yo mess. So finding a balanced tension will mean that you have yarn that's easier to work with. It'll be easier to spin. You won't be constantly losing your yarn on your wheel. Once you've spun 2 bobbins worth of singles, you can do a 2-ply yarn. Check out this video here where I talk about how to do a 2-ply yarn. That is where you're taking 2 singles of yarn and twisting them together to create a double-plied yarn. Then you can transfer it to a niddy noddy. I have a video up here all about how to do that and create skeins of yarn from your hand spun fiber, or wind it up on a ball winder. You can find links to ball winders in the description below, as well as niddy noddies. When you begin to spin, you'll want to think about what type of yarn it is you want to be making, whether that's a fine yarn like you can see on this wheel right now, or something that's thicker. You'll want to pull more fiber out as you're spinning, or doing something variegated. So let's play around with some textures here. Starting out with more of an even, finer yarn, pulling out an even amount of fiber and creating a nice, even, fine single. If I want to go a little bit thicker, I start pulling more fiber out of my skein and I end up with thicker yarn. So it's still pretty even, I'm just getting a thicker, bulkier yarn. And then if you want to add some variegation and do some slubs, you can start to pull lots of thick pieces out and thin pieces. So you can see I'm just grabbing big tufts and then allowing it to become small in between. So I'll end up with a fun, variegated yarn doing this. And I'm not being particular about how even it is or how even each slub is from each other or how big they are. I'm just playing around with thickness and thinness. The thicker you pull the fiber, the more twist you'll want to enter so that it doesn't come apart when you go to ply it. So I'll pull this off to show you what this looks like. Here is a variegated, and if I went to twist it or ply it together, you'd end up with something like this, very chunky yarn, very variegated. If I come down to where I was just doing a nice thick yarn, you can see I end up with a bit more even yarn, but still fairly bulky. And then I come to my finer section of yarn, and if I want to ply that double ply, I would end up with a slightly finer, more even plied yarn. Experiment with different thicknesses or thinness of yarn and with the texture, whether it's slub or a nice consistent yarn. And then you can play around with plying a slub with a consistent yarn or 2 slubs together and experiment with different fun textures of yarn. Now, a quick suggestion on drive bands: when you're taking a break from spinning, loosen your drive band by moving it down, or like on this Ashford Traveler, you can take it off and let it rest on the flyer. That way it doesn't hold the drive band in constant tension, so that when you come back to spin, you just pop it back on and you have a nice amount of tension and it doesn't stretch out your drive band. Okay, another quick maintenance thing for spinning wheels is spinning wheel oil. When you are spinning, you may start to hear funny noises from your wheel. Things will squeak. It may not rotate as easily as it had at one point. So adding a little bit of spinning wheel oil where on different places on the wheel will help it to function more productively. So put some oil where the flyer meets the maiden. So right here in the back where the whirl meets the maiden, against the bobbin on either side here, maybe down on the crank where the crank meets the shaft and where the footmen sit on the crank, and then give it a good spin so that everything kind of works in, the oil works around and helps it move more smoothly. Usually your spinning wheel will come with spinning wheel oil. You can get it at Paradise Fibers or other spinning craft stores. I'll put a link in the description below for a couple places that you can find it. For the Traveler, a couple places to add oil would be down here on the footman, where the crankshaft meets the wood, in between the wheel here, on both sides, the wheel and the legs, so that it rotates around nicely. Here where the flyer meets the orifice, at the other end, right there, between the bobbin, and I think that's it. Doing these little maintenance things like taking care of your drive band and adding oil will just ensure that your spinning wheel lasts as long as possible and functions well each time you use it. Like this video if you want to see more spinning videos, and subscribe so you get notified of every video I put out. Be sure to check out that beginner spinning video. I go over all the basics and how you can get started on a spinning wheel. Check the links in the description below for lots of resources, tools, and all the materials that I used in this video, as well as resources for these two spinning wheels. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Happy spinning.